I'm here at Gladstone Pottery Museum in the room that's usually used to demonstrate throwing pottery on a wheel to visitors. As the museum is closed at the moment, we don't have any visitors in today. If you have some clay at home and you would like to make a pot but you don't have a wheel, I'm going to show you a way that you can make a pot by hand. And what we're going to do today is use a method called coil building, and we're going to use coils of clay. A coil of clay is a sausage-shaped piece of clay that's quite flexible. You can bend it round into different shapes, which is how we've made the word coil here. And if you follow the quantities that I've used today, you'll end up with a pot that is about this big. This pencil is about the same length as my hand, and the pot is 5.5 centimetres tall, I think, to be precise. The actual quantities of clay you use don't matter too much. If you use more clay, you'll have a bigger pot, and if you use less clay, you'll have a smaller pot. I'm going to talk about numbers in relation to the quantities of clay because it's quite easy to buy packets like this. This is a packet of air drying clay, and this packet contains 500 grams of clay. If you have clay like this at home, you probably don't want to use it all to make one thing. So we're going to make a pot today that only uses half of this. I have a piece of clay here that is 500 grams, and we're just going to break it in half. If you're making something at home, the clay that you're not going to work with, put that back in a bag, wrap it up really well to keep the air away from it, because if you leave it out in the air, it will dry out and you won't be able to use it. So we're only going to keep out the piece we're going to be working with. We are going to start by making the base of the pot, and to make the base of my pot, I used 50 grams of clay. So we've got 250 grams here. We want about a fifth of it. And to make the base, we're going to roll that piece of clay into a ball. And flatten it out. I'm going to press this down. I'm using a board to work on. If you're making something at home, use a surface to protect the table or whatever you're working on. So we're going to do a little bit of pressing and lift it up and press it down, and we're aiming to flatten it out so it's the same thickness all the way across. And for today's purposes, I want this to be about 0.5 centimetre thick. You can measure it if you really want to. And we're trying to keep it round as possible. If yours isn't perfectly round, don't worry. Roundish will be good enough. So we've got our base made. We need to make the coils of clay, the sausages of clay. The piece of clay that we've got left, we're going to break that into 6 pieces of the same size. So we've got 6 equally sized pieces. And I found for my pot, which uses 6 coils of clay, this was about the right amount of clay. So we've got 6 pieces of clay that are about the same size. We only need one of these to start with. And to make our first coil of clay, we're going to take that first piece of clay, roll it into a sausage shape. I find it easier to start this in my hands and then roll this on the board. You can use one hand if that's easier for you. You can use 2 hands. And what we're trying to do is roll the clay backwards and forwards so it rolls over a few times. And we want it to be the same thickness all the way along. For today, I'm aiming to make my coil of clay a little bit thinner than my little finger. If your coils of clay are a little bit thicker, that's fine. You'll just have a pot that's a little bit thicker around the edge, around the walls. I find it easiest to concentrate on how thick they are. So when we carry on making coils, what we're trying to do is make them all the same length. I've made the rest of mine already, so I can show you what to do with them. And they are all about the same thickness. I think I just said the same length then, didn't I? I find it easier to concentrate on how thick the coils are, because you can always break bits off if they're not quite as short as you want them to be. And then to attach our first coil, we're going to take some water. I've got a little pot of water here. We're going to moisten the outside of our disc that's making the base. And we're going to start putting the coil on top of that disc. And when I get to the join here, this is too long, I'm going to break this off. Make this bit a bit thinner. Make this bit a bit thinner. And join the two ends together. And we can smooth them together. To join the base onto the first coil so it's nice and secure, we're going to go all the way around and smooth upwards. And we'll go back round and make this a bit neater in a minute. We want to go all the way around once first of all to make sure it's joined on. We might leave it like that for the moment and put the next coil on. We're going to put some water around the top. We're going to put the second coil right on top of the first coil. If it's too long, break it off. When you're breaking them off, we want them to overlap slightly at the sides, because that will make a slightly safer join. We can pop a little bit of water on the edge of that coil, smooth the ends in, and we're going to smooth them together. This time we're going to smooth this down all the way around. This is quite a small pot, and I have found that it is easier to pick it up when I'm smoothing. I'm also taller than the board that I'm working on. If I was a shorter person, it might be easier to leave the pot on the board and smooth it. And then we're going to attach another coil. I've made all my coils before I started because I thought it would be a good way to check if they were all about the same thickness. If you are using air drying clay at home, you'll probably find that it dries out a little bit quicker than if you're using the clay that I'm using here. The clay I'm using here is stoneware clay, and it's the clay that we use in the museum here for throwing and also for hand building pottery as well with visitors. It doesn't dry out anywhere near as quickly as air drying clay. So if you have air drying clay at home, you might find if you have made all your coils of clay and they're all lovely and neat and all the same thickness, that you might need to cover them up with a damp cloth or a piece of plastic while you are working on attaching them so they don't dry out. So I'm going to make this my last coil, and this will be 4 altogether. And if I attach the last two coils, it would be a little bit taller. So we'll go all the way around, make sure it's smoothed on. Now, the more you pick it up, the more it's going to bend around. So if you want to keep your pot as round as possible, don't fiddle with it too much. So if you are lifting it up, lift it up gently. I'm going back around and smoothing out those little rough spots. The amount of clay that I've suggested using for today is enough to make a pot that's about 5 centimetres tall, and that will use all of that 250 grams of clay that I've used. And this means that if you want to decorate your pot, we need to have a think about how we can create a decoration. So here I have a pencil. I'm going to use one of the wooden tools that we use in the museum for making things. A pencil will do just as well. And we can create a decoration on the pot by drawing on it. So the one that I made earlier, which is a full 5.5 centimetres tall because it has an extra 2 coils of clay on top of it. I've decorated with a very simple pattern, and lots of Bronze Age pottery has simple patterns that are repeated that make a complicated pattern when you combine all the simple elements together, and that goes all the way around. Or we can draw something completely different, and I'm going to have a little flower on this for today, and maybe a couple of leaves on my flower. You can decorate the top of your pot as well if you want to. We can add a little pattern. All the way around. And this clay that we use in the museum, the stoneware clay, will take about a week to dry out all the way through at room temperature. Once you've finished your pot, you need to leave it to dry. When it's completely dry, it'll be quite hard. And at that stage, if you want to, you can paint them. If you're making air-dried pottery at home, or if you're making pottery just out of this kind of clay, and you don't have a chance to fire it, but you want it to be different colours, you can paint it. And use it for things like pens and pencils because they're not wet. And if you have some clay at home, have fun making a coil pot with it.